without the government getting involved. It's not that they're constantly trying to intervene everywhere else, but for other people, they have the highest standards that come out of nowhere. My final question is, I want to get, I really wanted time to go by before I asked you this one. What is the genesis of RussiaGate? What is the biggest claim that they have? Or I'm sorry, the biggest claim is Vladimir Putin either conspired or had Trump as a dupe to enter the election. The Russian intelligence manipulated social media and even hacked some voting machines in order to turn the tide from Hillary to Donald Trump so he could use him as a dupe. Is there anything to RussiaGate and the Mueller report that's of importance?
Well, first of all, the entire plot was fake. The whole thing was a lie. The plot was to make you think that it might be true, was the only actual conspiracy involved in the entire thing. The Mueller report itself absolutely is important because that's where he admits it. The whole thing was fake. They got nothing. And so there are major parts of this in different facets of it, okay? So one part of it is the hacking and the leaking of the DNC emails to WikiLeaks. Then there is the question of Page and Papadopoulos, Sessions and Flynn, and Donald Trump Jr. and different members of the campaign and their supposed treasonous relations with the Russians. Then there's the accusation that Russian intelligence hijacked Facebook and Twitter and bought all these ads to sow division and create all these protest movements and to create the Black Lives Matter movement because, you know, those people were perfectly happy with their station in life before the Russians came and lied to them and made them think that getting killed by cops sucked and stuff like that. And every bit of it is a lie. Oh, and then you mentioned the hacking of the voting machines. That's what a lot of people thought they heard, but that was actually not even the claim. The claim was only that they had hacked, and get this, the claim comes from the Department of Homeland Security, okay? In other words, the FBI didn't bother with this crap. You know, this DHS is like the bastard child worth less than the ATF. I mean, these guys are the absolute dregs of the federal government. They don't know nothing. That ain't a lie, some garbage. But anyway, all they said was that Russian bots, right? Like computers from, we think, Russian IP addresses scanned our servers, which actually that's not anything, right? That's all web bots do all day is scan servers. And for God's sake, the fact that a server is in Russia doesn't mean a damned thing. And you know it, and I know it, and these stupid liars know it. It doesn't mean anything. It means nothing. Let me tell you, Keith, there was no effort by Russia to intervene in the American election of 2016 at all. It never happened. And there's no proof that any of it ever happened. You look at the hacking of the DNC. Robert Mueller says, well, you know, we think they did it, but he has an indictment that has no proof and no discussion of how they did it. Just a bunch of claims and assertions. And then in the Mueller report, he admits that, well, even though we think the Russians are the ones who got these emails, we have no chain of custody for how they delivered these emails to WikiLeaks for Julian Assange to post. Oh, and by the way, we didn't bother interviewing Julian Assange because we don't want to know what he has to say about this. And he's sworn over and over that the Russians didn't have a damn thing to do with it. And I've interviewed Craig Murray, who is a great friend of Julian Assange and supporter of his, the former Russian ambassador to Uzbekistan, who exposed torture there. And he told me on my show that he knows who hacked the DNC, and it wasn't any foreign government. It was a Democrat. And he did not say it was Seth Rich, but he said it was a Democrat from the DNC who is angered about what was going on by the corruption and leaked the stuff, and that he has met this person and this person has no conceivable tie to Russian intelligence in any way whatsoever, is where that stuff comes from. And is there any reason to believe that the Russians were behind that hack? No. And in fact, there's the only so-called evidence that they did, in fact, leads exactly the opposite way. That, oh, look, a bunch of Cyrillic letters and a reference to Iron Felix, the founder of the NKVD, is hidden in the metadata in here. And Matt Taibbi says, that's like finding a hidden reference to Alan Dulles in the Stuxnet code. Like, they were just not going to do that. That doesn't make any sense. Iron Felix was the founder of the NKVD, 100 years ago. And just, this is obviously a telltale footprint that was left there by someone framing the Russians, is obviously the more likely explanation of even that. And that's just step one. Then you have Papadopoulos. Well, the guy who told Papadopoulos that the Russians have some emails from Hillary, he was a British spook. He's a Maltese guy named Misfoot who was working for the British, and clearly he was not working for the Russians, had no tie to the Russians, didn't have any scuttlebutt from the Russians, but he's the one who put it in Papadopoulos's ear that the Russians have some stuff from Hillary. And then they got this Australian to claim that Papadopoulos told him that, yeah, the Russians have some stuff on Hillary. But then now we know, far after the fact, that the FBI's internal memos to each other said this is all BS. This guy doesn't have any ties to the Russians and any access to any Russian information. And they actually refused to even use Papadopoulos as a pretext for the rest of their investigation the entire time. But they didn't tell you that. They spent 3 years pretending that Papadopoulos had been suborned by the Russians and was part of the way that they were controlling Donald Trump. Same thing with Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort, guess what? He worked for Yanukovych, the Russian-leaning president of Ukraine that America overthrew in 2014. But he was clearly CIA, and his job, well, not clearly CIA, but he was, at least it very much looks like he was CIA and was representing America's interest. He was trying to get Yanukovych to sign the deal with the EU, not to turn toward Russia. He was trying to get the guy to serve America's interests there. That's what a traitor Manafort is. And then they go, oh, Manafort gave the polling data to this guy Kalimnik. Well, Kalimnik worked for the State Department. Kalimnik worked for John McCain's International Republican Institute for 20 years. He wasn't FSB. He wasn't a Russian intelligence agent. He worked for the Americans. Then there's Mike Flynn. No, he did not sleep with the Russian spy lady at Cambridge in 2014. That was a made-up lie by liars. And no, he did not commit treason on the phone with Kislyak, the Russian ambassador. In fact, the closest he came to committing treason there was asking Kislyak to veto a UN resolution against Israel on behalf of Israel. And what was he doing? He was asking the Russian a favor, and the Russian told him no. Does that sound like the Russian giving Mike Flynn his marching orders because he's a compromised spy of the Russian Federation? For Christ's sake, this guy was a 3-star general. And when they made the biggest deal in the world about how he went to this RT dinner in Moscow. Yeah, well, guess what? He was a 3-star general working for the DIA at the time. You don't think he went there on a mission for the DIA? And that he didn't come back and debrief the DIA about every single thing he'd learned there? This guy got his clearance, his security clearance over and over again after that. He wasn't, he got fired, not for treason with the Russians. He got fired because he was trying to stop Obama's treason with Al-Qaeda in Syria. He was passing intelligence to Assad to use to kill Al-Qaeda guys. Remember, the military backs the SDF against Al-Qaeda. It's the CIA that backs Al-Qaeda. The military was against that. Well, Flynn was DIA. And so he was giving the Germans intel to give to Assad to kill Al-Qaeda guys with. CIA assets. Tough. Boo-hoo for you. And that was what he got fired for. And for going on the Mehdi Hassan show. Mehdi Hassan, who's a horrible bastard, it must be said. But who interviewed Mike Flynn, and Mike Flynn says absolutely it's a willful decision to allow the rise of ISIS to put pressure on Assad. No question about it. And explains all that. People can Google that. And that was what they hated about Flynn. And he was soft on Russia. He wanted to focus on China, ally with Russia in order to focus on hemming in China. And that was a difference of doctrinal opinion there that they tried to get him on. But then look what they had to do. They had to pretend that he was violating the Logan Act when he told Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, that, hey, Obama just put these new sanctions on you. But we're talking about December 16, okay? Obama put these sanctions on you, but don't do tit for tat and do anything back because we're about to take power in another 6 weeks here, and we want to strike a new note and get along. So don't do anything stupid. In fact, what did Putin do? After Obama kicked a bunch of Russians out of the country and announced these new sanctions, Putin invited all the American embassy staff to a Christmas party and said, I don't want to fight. Let's not fight. Let's keep it cool. Taking Flynn's advice on that. Well, now look, man, the Logan Act, Keith, says that you can't go and make a separate deal on behalf of the United States with Putin or any other foreign sovereign government, okay? Or say like you were a CEO of an oil company or something. You can't have your own separate trade deal that undercuts the USA's trade deal. That's what the Logan Act says. It's never been enforced ever, not in 200 years ever. It's a dead letter. It is not law. And it sure as hell does not apply to the designated national security advisor of the president-elect of the United States of America. This is not in the summer of 2016. This is in the last months. This is after the election. This is after the Electoral College has voted. Donald Trump is the president-elect. Mike Flynn, 3-star general, former chief of DIA, by all accounts an American patriot, is his, although he is a kook and horrible on Iran and all kinds of other things. But anyway, he tried to blame Benghazi on Iran. That's what a nut he is. But anyway, they pretended that he was guilty of this horrible felony as this pretext to investigate him. And then when the one FBI office wanted to drop it and said, there's really nothing here, the other FBI office said, no, we want to continue it. We want to do it more. And so that was when they set up the kill shot. And they had David Ignatius write an essay in the Washington Post saying, ooh, Mike Flynn was caught red-handed on this call with the Russian ambassador. And then they used that article that they put in the Post as a pretext to interview him again and then try to accuse him of making false statements. And we know now that they rehearsed. It's in all the documents that have been released way late in the game, that they rehearsed and practiced over and over again how to fool him into thinking that we're just friends having a conversation here, and to give him no clue whatsoever that this is an interrogation, that we're trying to trap him, and that later we're going to say that he lied to us. And then even in the documents, they wrote, he didn't lie to us. He told the truth the whole time and it was fine. And then they just goddamn lied and themselves and said that he lied to them and charged him with lying to them. And then every liberal Keith go, oh yeah, well, he pled guilty. Yeah, so what? So do innocent people all damn day. Why don't you wake up? And in this case, we know how they extorted him. They threatened to put his son in prison. And they said, you better plead guilty. Not just we'll give you life, we'll put your son in the pen if you don't plead guilty. And that was how they got him to plead guilty to something he was innocent of. You see how that works? You know, right-wingers and libertarians who are skeptical of these Black Lives Matter people, they can do that to a 3-star general. They can railroad a 3-star general. They can sure as hell do it to the poorest, blackest members of your community, okay? But anyway, Jeff Sessions, U.S. Senator. Oh, he met with Kislyak. He had these conversations with Kislyak. Well, Kislyak is the ambassador. And where did he meet him? He met him in his Senate office in front of his staff. Who's his staff? Oh, they're all retired Army officers. Yeah, I'm sure these guys all committed high treason with the Russian ambassador together. It's absolutely impossible on its face, right? Then he shook hands with him at a speech, and it's on tape. Hi, how you doing? Oh, yeah, some more high treason there. And they just blew all of that up. Then you have the Trump Tower meeting, where the people who went there, they enticed Trump Jr. by saying, hey, we have some secret intelligence on Hillary, and he went there. But they didn't have anything, and they weren't intelligence officers, and they had no intelligence officer connections. They had nothing. And the whole meeting was a completely stupid bust. And then guess what? It turns out that the guy who set up Steele to write the phony Steele dossier, accusing Donald Trump of all these things and being compromised with the Russians and accusing Page and all these things, Glenn Simpson, he was the one who sent the lady to lie to these guys that she had some dirt on Hillary in the first place. The whole thing was a setup. The Trump Tower meeting itself was a setup, even though it never went anywhere. It didn't mean anything anyway. And then you have the Steele dossier that accused Trump of being compromised since 2013 when the Russians secretly taped him hiring hookers to pee on a bed that Obama had slept in when he was there, which is a total hoax. We know that every single bit of the Steele report was a lie. Everything that's not open, everything in there that's true was open source, reported in the newspapers before they put it in there. And everything else in there is not true. Every single other thing in there was not true. And it said that the Trump team, led by his lawyer, had worked with the Russians on setting up all the Facebook ad intervention, which turned out amounted to nothing. You're talking about 10,000 ads in a sea of literally 1 trillion political Facebook ads during that era. Where the troll farm that was doing it had no real connections to Russian intelligence. And there's every reason to believe, in fact, most of the ads, a vast majority of the ads happened after the election. It was all just clickbait. It was all just crap. They go, oh, well, they're trying to destabilize the society. That's your default answer, because you can't say they were trying to support Trump because it was after the election. And you can't say they were trying to support Trump because they had a bunch of pro-Hillary stuff too. And you can't say they were trying to support Trump because a lot of this stuff had nothing to do with politics at all. It was just clickbait. It's a troll farm. That's all it is. Same thing for the whole epidemic of fake news. Oh, the Russian fake news. No, it was Macedonian fake news. It was one town in Macedonia, and there were some Americans doing this too. But the big one was a town in Macedonia where all these teenagers figured out that with some cheap HTML, you could create a fake American newspaper and then give them a headline like Pope endorses Trump, and 10,000 stupid old baby boomers will click on the Facebook link to your fake news, and you make a bunch of money. And that was it. It had nothing to do with Russian intelligence whatsoever. The whole thing was completely fake. And so none of the Steele report was true. None of the hacking of the DNC stuff has ever been proved and is probably not true at all. None of the Trump campaign's relations and meetings and talking with the Russians, even the negotiations over the Trump Tower. His lawyer, this is what he did. He went to Kremlin.gov or whatever it is and filled out their web form email. Hey, can I talk with somebody about this Trump Tower deal, please? And then they answered it back, no. And that was it. And the whole Mueller report explains all this, that they are batting zero. It's just like the case for war against Iraq in 2002. They got 15 major points. All of them are lies. None of it adds up. 15 times 0 is 0. And it's the same thing here with RussiaGate. There is nothing to it. There never was. The whole thing is a damn lie.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for your time. I recommend everyone check out Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, one of the best cases for blowback using excellent sources in Chapter 1. I just want to finish my final quote here on the RussiaGate scandal. We had about 70 million people watching the third presidential debate in 2016 where Hillary Clinton said 17 intelligence agencies have all confirmed Russia hacked our emails. However, a year later, June 29th, 2017, here is the New York Times. A White House memo article on Monday about President Trump's deflections and denials about Russia referred incorrectly to the source of an intelligence assessment that said Russia orchestrated hacking attacks during last year's presidential election. The assessment was made by 4 intelligence agencies: the Office of Director of National Intelligence, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the National Security Agency. The assessment was not approved by all 17 organizations in the intelligence community. They throw a lie at you, make it really big, quietly, a long time later, they tell you, sorry about that, that wasn't true. Yep. Thank you for watching Absolutely. Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone. Check out Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. Scott, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thanks again, Keith. Great to talk to you, bud.